Today we're doing 2 weeks of a series called God and Our Stuff. God and Our Stuff. And I believe with all of my heart that nothing tests a person's heart like their money or their stuff. Now, when I just said that word money, I saw some of you immediately just, because we tend to do that, don't we? When we talk about money, we'll talk about our faith. We'll talk about our family, we'll talk about our kids, we'll talk about our job, we'll talk about the Iron Bowl, we'll talk about all these things, but when you say something about our stuff and our money, we get strangely quiet and sometimes even become a little defensive when we're talking about our stuff, right? Kind of reminds me in a church down in the deep south, preacher, he was moving toward the end of his message, and he was getting a big crescendo, growing, getting to this big climax of his message, and he said, the church is like the crippled man. He has to get up and walk, and the congregation responded, let it walk, Pastor, let it walk. And he said, the church is like Elijah on Mount Carmel. It's got to run, and the people responded, let it run, Pastor, let it run. And he said, the church is like mounting up with wings as eagles. And the congregation said, let it fly, Pastor, let it fly. And the pastor said, now, if we're going to fly, it's going to take money. And the congregation responded, let it walk, Pastor, let it walk. Truth is, nothing reveals more about our true attitude of our heart than our stuff. Nothing reveals who is Lord of our life more than our money and our stuff. In fact, Jesus, his words, he put it this way in Luke 16. He said, no servant can serve two masters. For either he'll hate the one and he'll love the other, or he'll stand devotedly by one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon, that is, your earthly possessions or anything else you trust in and rely on instead of God. And it goes on, it says, now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things, and they sneered and ridiculed him. And that's often the response we have in today's world when we talk about our stuff. It's been said that an accurate test of who's truly master of your life can be revealed sometimes by just looking at our checkbook or our charge account. Both are good indicators of who's really master of our life. So God will use our stuff, and God will use money to test our hearts. Because here's the thing, and this is so important, I want you to catch this morning, is that God is not after your money or your stuff. God doesn't need it, okay? He doesn't need our money. He doesn't need our stuff. So he's not after our money. He's after our heart. That's the whole bottom line, is that God is after our heart. He doesn't want certain areas of our life. He wants all areas of our life. He doesn't want there to be any off-limit areas that we offer. He wants our heart, all of us, because when he has our heart, when he has your heart, when he has my heart, he has everything. It means that we treasure him. Because what we treasure and what we value and what we are loyal to, what has our love and devotion of our heart, when we are devoted, when we treasure something, we usually have our heart in it. And that's why he's after our heart. So the question is, whose or what has your heart? Who or what has your heart? Who is your master? Who's first in your life? And to illustrate this point, Jesus told a story. He was so good at telling stories. So he tells this story one time, and it's found in Luke's Gospel, chapter 12. And as he's getting ready, before he tells a story, he's been ministering and dealing with people, and someone in the crowd yelled out, and they said, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Just out of the blue. I mean, he's doing his ministry thing, and somebody in the crowd's going, "Hey, teacher, tell my brother he's got to divide up our inheritance, my father's inheritance with me." And it's amazing. Money is such a powerful thing, isn't it? I mean, it will divide families. They say that half of the divorces in our land is over money. There's an issue. Money is a powerful thing of who's going to get their stuff, and I'm going to get my stuff, and you're going to get your stuff. So this guy is saying, tell my brother he's got to divide our inheritance with me. And he goes on, and Jesus replied to this guy who yelled out in the crowd. He said, friend, who made me judge over you to decide such things as that? And then Jesus made this statement. Now, I love this. He goes on the next statement. He says, beware. And it's amazing how Jesus always found teachable moments. No matter what he was doing or where he was at. Something would come up and he would find a way to turn that into a teachable moment. So he's doing that here. He said, beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life, this is a huge statement. Life is not measured by how much you own. It's not measured by how much you own. And isn't that just the opposite of the way we are today? We usually measure people by what they own. We measure people's lives. We measure our life by the stuff that we have. Well, they live in this neighborhood. They drive that kind of car. They live in this kind of house. They have that kind of job. They buy their kids these kind of things. And we measure by the stuff that we have. Jesus said, beware, don't do that. And then he sees this teachable moment. And he says, how about a story? And it says, then he told him a story. And the story goes like this. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. And he said to himself, what should I do? I don't have room for all of my crops. This man, it's a story, and the man's story is of faithfulness. He's got a fruitful harvest. He's got a bumper crop, and now he's trying to decide, what am I going to do with all the extra crop that I've taken in? And it's interesting because the story doesn't say he got it immorally. He didn't do anything underhandedly or crooked. He worked hard probably, put in some long hours. He worked his land. He did what he was supposed to do, and he had a great year. He had a bumper crop. It goes on and says, then he said, I know I'll tear down my barns and build bigger. That's what I'll do. Since I've got so much surplus now, I'm going to tear down my barns and I'm going to build bigger barns. So he was very prudent. He decided, hey, bigger storage areas for all the stuff that I've been given. But the main issue is not his wealth. The main issue was his attitude toward his wealth. So interesting to me that in 2 verses there of this story, 2 verses, 11 times you'll find the words, I will, as if he owned it all. You find the words, I will, my fruits, my barns, my goods, my soul. He's focused on the wealth side. And it goes on and says, then he said, after he said, I'll build bigger barns. I'll tear down the old barns, I'll build bigger barns. Get it right here. Then I'll sit back and say to myself, friend, you stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Sounds good, doesn't it? Who wouldn't want that? Eat, drink a bit. You got it made. You're on easy street now. You got a barn load of stuff and just take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But you see, it wasn't a health or a wealth issue. It was a heart issue. God was not after the man's money. He was not after his crops. He was not after his barns. He was after his heart. And in this story, Jesus gives us a very important lesson, and he warns us about something that attacks our heart and keeps us from giving our heart fully to God, and that thing is greed. That was the bottom line. It wasn't about all that the man had. It was about his attitude toward. It was about greed. And greed is simply this. It's making the assumption that it's all for our consumption. Everything I got, everything that I get is for me. Spend on me, to do for how I want to do with it. So it's the assumption that it's all for our consumption. The craving of more, the pursuit of more to be used on self. Paul warned Timothy one time in his writings. He said, for the love of money, not money, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people craving money have wandered away from true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. I read this verse. I've read it many, many times, but I thought, how many of us have pierced ourselves with many sorrows, all because of the pursuit of more money, more stuff. We put in longer hours. We work harder to acquire more. We overextend ourselves. We run up a mountain of debt, and we can't get our head above water, all at the expense and the neglect of often our marriages, our children, our friends, even our health. Listen, don't let greed get its hooks in you or in your children, because it comes with a very heavy spiritual, emotional, and physical price tag. So the rich man made the assumption that his barns being filled, overflowing, he made the assumption that it was all for his consumption. But Jesus had something else to say. He said, but God said to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who'll get everything you worked for?" I can just imagine standing there that day as Jesus is telling this story, and he's got this crowd around him, and he's talking about a man who was so blessed, and his barns, he had to tear down his barns, build bigger barns to hold all of his blessings, and it's going along, and everybody's going like, yeah, count me in on that, yeah. And then Jesus gets to the punchline of it, and he says, "This night the man dies, and who's going to get what he stored up for himself?" Probably shocked the crowd that day. And then Jesus raised the question. He said, who's going to get what the man acquired? In other words, who's going to get the stack? Okay, who's going to get the barns? Because this man is going to die. We often approach life and money and stuff with that same attitude that we better get what we can get while we can get it. Life is short, and you need to accumulate all you can get and enjoy all you can, because this life is all there is. This life is all that matters. And apparently that's what this man thought, and Jesus calls him a fool. His response to wealth was the assumption that it was for his consumption. And then Jesus wraps up his story, and he says, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. Some translations say, but lay up treasures in heaven. Jesus concludes the story with, this is how it'll be for anyone who piles up treasures for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Richness toward God, that means just simply stewarding his blessings for his purposes and not stockpiling them for ours. And please hear me again, Jesus is not condemning wealth. He's just cautioning about attitudes that come with wealth and how we use the wealth. So the question is, what is our attitude towards, and how do we use what God has blessed us with? Is generosity our habit and default response? Or does compassion take a back seat to our personal desires and what we want and what we want to use it for? Another subtle issue that's raised in this story is we tend to hoard possessions because we're convinced that this life is all there is. Or at least that's what our culture tries to make us believe. We live in a culture that lives by the motto of this rich man who says, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we could die. So let's just live it up today. Let's spend it all today. Let's get all we can today. And there's no accountability. There's no sense of an afterlife or an eternity. So we live and we spend and we use our resources like there's nothing after this life. But the truth is, we'll spend a lot more time on the other side of this life than we have on this side of life. And I would hate to know that I spent and invested it all on this temporal side of life and didn't have anything invested in the eternal side of life. This story also raises a question of the proper use of our resources. Reading this and hearing this, are we supposed to save up and provide for our family? Do we save for our kids' college? Do we prepare for retirement? Answer to all those is yes, yes, yes. You do the smart things. You do the things to take care of your family. The fool's error was that he only desired to provide for himself. Jesus isn't condemning the use of resources for the benefit of our family or the benefit of others. And here's a fundamental test. Here's a way that you can test to see if you're using your resources right. Do they become tools of service that benefit God's agenda and others by enabling them to be a better person to serve God? Do your resources benefit God and his purposes? And does it cause other people and it bring them to a position to better serve God. And I think the last thing out of this story probably that we can take away is self-examination. How do I feel about and view what God has given me? When I look inside, do I have the attitude of this young rich guy who said, hey, it's the assumption that it's all for my consumption? As we read the story, we have to ask this question, and this is the question I want to leave you with today, is will we fill our barns with goods, or will we fill our barns with God? Will we fill our barns with goods, or will we fill them with God? Will we be consumed with building wealth on earth in this temporal life, or will we build wealth in heaven for eternity? Jesus was speaking one day and he said these words, don't store up treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy them and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moth and rust cannot destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. And here's the line right here, what he's getting at. It's because wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. When we treasure God above our stuff, He'll make sure we have all the stuff we need when we need it. In fact, that's what Jesus said just a few verses down from where we just read. He made this statement. He said, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. And He said, and all these other things, food, clothing, and shelter, all these other things, He said, all these other things will be added to you. They'll be provided when you need it. You'll have all the stuff you need when you need it if you will seek God above your stuff. And you say, okay, well, there's got to be a payoff. If we're not investing everything in this life and we're trying to invest in eternity, then what is the payoff? And the payoff is simply this: your rewards will come from where your investments lie. If you have stock in Walmart, and probably Thursday night and Friday, it probably shot up pretty good. But if you have stock in Walmart, then you're going to get a dividend check, not from Apple. You're not going to get a dividend check from GM. You're not going to get a dividend check from Google. You're going to get a dividend check from Walmart. The same principle, if you invest everything you have and consume everything you have in this life, then you're going to get your payoff in this life. And the problem with that is that when this life is over, when you die, when you cease to exist, all your dividends is going to be right here, and it's just going to be there. Whoever gets it, it'll just be divided up, kind of like the guy at the beginning of the story said, Dad died, now tell him to split our inheritance, right? And it's just going to be right here on this earth, and you'll step into eternity with nothing. But if you not only handle your possessions wisely here, but you're making investments for eternity, then when you step from this life into the next, then you are actually stepping in to your reward. You're stepping into the payoff. You're stepping into what God will welcome us to. And He said, hey, you paid it forward. Hey, you handled your stuff and your money and your resources. You handled it well on earth, but you kept investing in my purposes and my causes. And now here's the payoff. Here's the dividend check. You see, God never blesses us with more so we can build bigger barns to put all of our stuff in. He blesses us so that we can not just acquire stuff to fill our garages and our houses and our bank accounts and our schedules with. He blesses us so that we can bless others and bless His causes on this earth. We can either live tight-fisted or we can live open-heartedly with generosity. God will not bless greed. But God says, I will open the windows of heaven for those who will open their hearts and their hands to bless others and to further my causes. This rich fool, the Bible calls him, he missed an important lesson in life, that God doesn't bless us so we can store up for ourselves. He foolishly assumed that it was all for his consumption. That God blessed him not so that he could store up, but God blessed him so he could give away the surplus. And he blessed him so that he could be a blessing. So my question today as we close is this: could it be that God blesses us? Could it be God pours into us? Could it be God fills our barns so that not that we can store the stuff and hoard it, but so that we could give it away and bless others and invest in and expand His kingdom causes? And for those who will generously give of what God has given them, He said, I'll continue to pour into you. I read a poem many years ago, but it's always stuck with me. It goes something like this: I counted dollars while God counted crosses. I counted my gains while He counted my losses. I counted honors and sought degrees, and He counted the hours I'd spent on my knees. And I never knew until one day by the grave how vain are the things that we spend our lives to save. Guard your heart and let us have hearts of generosity and openness so that God can bless us and in return we can bless others. Let's pray. God, as we examine our hearts and our motives today, put a finger on any area of our life that we're holding on to too tightly. May our hearts and our hands open to freely receive and also to freely give. We seek you and we worship you and we treasure you today. Our devotion is in you. We ask these things in Christ's name.